Christians need to grow up. I think the seminary experience is modeled too much after the public university experience. We love narcissists.
We love to outsource our faith, and we love even more to outsource our faith to someone who wants to take control. Quite the business model that is modern Christianity, or modern churchianity, rather, should I say.
People who they have a sense of safety. Notice I use the word safety. They can't be controlled.
We are recognizing we can't really do much in the way of nobody can provide a straightforward answer across the board for all of these people. That would be such an injustice. There is, different organizations at play, different priorities at play, even different eschatologies at play that are being accounted for and then moved forward with, in regard to how to deal with these leaders. But what does it tell us, maybe for one, about their followers falling away from faith? Because I know that there has been many, Christian musical artists that have gone away from the faith over my lifetime. A lot of them that have completely rejected the faith, and that leads a lot of people feeling stranded. Maybe not to the same extent as these ministers, as these pastors, Todd White, Sean Bolz, et cetera, et cetera. What does it tell us? Maybe one, how could Christians self-reflect on their own faith when they're feeling this rocky situation?
So the dynamic here is that a congregation is, in terms of like its discernment of leaders, and I want to use this word, and I want to use it without sounding cruel or insensitive. Christians, we are gullible. We just take for granted as what is said from the pulpit as gospel truth. The pastor said it, therefore it's true. I believe it. And he or she used a Bible verse to support it. Christians need to grow up. They need to be mature, and they need to really change the dynamics of the institutional church experience. I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. So there is this self-awareness that needs to come about. That's part of maturity. That's part of maturity. On the pastoral side, I think in my own experience, I don't know if I was ever truly trained to actually take care of someone. I was presented with responsibilities. I was presented with tasks. I was presented with theological knowledge, and I'm not trying to target one particular seminary because I have multiple seminary experiences. But there's so much that's done outside of relationship, and I think it's probably because the seminary experience. And this is getting into a little of the nitty gritty of my critique and my experience. I think the seminary experience is modeled too much after the public university experience. In the seminary, and there is so much difference. The environment is different. The collegial atmosphere is different. But family, I think we need much more of that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it just needs to become more prevalent. So pastorally, we need to understand what it's like to be within a family. And we need to maybe move away from certain aspects of the institutional system of higher education, prolong it a little bit, and make sure that we're all healthy before we go into serving people. One of the difficulties, of course, is that many seminary students are already on the job. So their attention is divided. And they're in the classroom, but they're also in the pulpit. Maybe congregations need to be a little bit more self-sufficient. And allowed to make mistakes, yes, but to step up and
given leadership, or just simply, participate.
One of in my very new experience as being the head of an actual legal ministry, I told my board and I told people that I was interested in having in leadership roles. I said, I want and I highly value your input. I need it.
Yeah.
At the same time, as the legal head of this organization, it falls on me to make the final call. But I will never make that call without the context of your involvement and your input and your fellowship and your prayers and support. I think so many pastors just feel so alone that they don't know what that's like. And they've, as one of my seminary professors said, they've forgotten what their role actually is. They're the CEO. They're the super business person who's building an empire. And, unfortunately, when that's the case, people become just fodder. They become cogs in the machine, and that's when wounding happens.
Yeah, talking about ministry stuff and how we go about that.
That's your camera, right?
I know that's my camera. That's our camera.
That's my camera.
That's your camera.
And this is our microphone.
Okay. All right. Listen, if you're looking for something that is different from what you've been told, we'd encourage you to just follow along the ride with this podcast. Get to know what kind of resources and things that we offer. Honestly, I'm not even going to. Uh, I don't like asking for money, but I do like the nice design. I do like cool designs. So if you want to pick up some cool designs, honestly, that might represent a gooder gospel that you're looking towards, that you resonate with, that is something that is answering some of the questions, some of, not all of, but some of the questions that you have on your heart. You might check out Live Laugh Apokatastasis. That's awesome. Go check it out. It's pretty dope.
And these are really good ways to donate to the ministry.
It's fascinating. You bring in two other organization styles or leadership positions that are really fascinating as analogies here. One of which, to quickly note on, is how much Christians that are going into pastoral ministry, that as it stands today, can quite often fall into this almost startup mindset, this entrepreneur
Very much so.
mindset. This, I need to go to this little small town and build it into something great, have a revival, start from my little Timbuktu little location. And so they treat it as such. And they get the big money in there. They bring in Series A, Series B funding, or there's a certain kind of aspect that can be brought into that. The other aspect is, you brought in the idea of the collegiate college kind of setting, right, or university style setting, and you can very prevalently see that with, there is a pastor or a lecturer up at the front of the classroom, and then there's all the people listening.
Mm-hmm.
And what is fascinating is there's this troubling similarity rather, in that regard, that there's these two people at the front, or this one person at the front of the class. But the difference, a big shining difference there is I'm drawing from Marty Solomon in the Bickle podcast, when he says, we today in Christianity teach to the lowest common denominator. So in rabbinic Judaism, they were finding the creme de la creme. They were finding the 1% of the 1% that knew their Bible so well, so intimately, through their educational process, that then they would say, okay, now I'm going to bring you under my wing. You become like me. You walk with me. You live with me. I am actually more of responsibility over you than your own parents are. And so they were teaching to the highest common denominator, which in a large sense is what the ideal university does today. But that's exactly the opposite of how the Christian pulpit does. They teach to the lowest common denominator. Whoever is coming in, bringing kind of that startup mindset, whoever's coming in, I need to talk to them. I need to convert them. I need to bring them into the fold and get them to stick, because then that is where my funding essentially comes from. While the college professor doesn't have that same urgency, that same startup mindset. So you have these two people at the front of the classroom, teaching one to the highest common denominator, ideally in university, and the other one teaching to the lowest in churches.
Right. So there is this definite relationship dynamic that needs to be addressed.
Mm.
What is the best dynamic in either situation that's going to create the greatest health?
Yeah.
My personal thought is, if I were in a position of teaching at a seminary or at a place of higher education, my classrooms would be as much like a family living room as possible. Let's have a meal together while we're having class. I will share from my wisdom and expertise and knowledge, but I will also do that in such a way that I give you multiple opportunities to take ownership of that and present and become an expert, on the fly, as it were. So I don't have a perfect answer. One of the things that I also want to talk about in terms of this, we're talking about ministry as a business.
Yeah.
And someone who's speaking from either a lectern or a pulpit, we love narcissists. We love them.
Tell me more. I like this
Yeah.
conversation.
So we've talked about these ministry leaders who have fallen and they've misbehaved and they've done things that are inappropriate, deceptive, betraying, that sort of thing, and they're all narcissists because they have created a system of control to keep people in line. But the problem is we love narcissists. We need narcissists. Why?
Yeah.
Because they inspire us. We look at their example and we say, "Oh, I want to be able to do what that person's doing," or "That person gave me, a pat on the back, and I'm approved." And so there are aspects to narcissist and narcissistic behavior
Mhm.
that we really appreciate and that we really want in our society. The problem is it becomes toxic very easily
Mhm.
and it becomes controlling very easily. We want people who are confident in themselves. We should be confident in ourselves, but none of that should ever happen outside of a healthy grounding of humility and also the context of being in relationship. Politically speaking, I'm just going to throw this out there because it's relative to what's happening in leadership politically right now. Trump is coming under fire. And so many people have said that he's a narcissist. I'm like, yeah, and we want a narcissist because they're confident, they have a plan, they know what they're doing, they build a people team around them to do it. That's great. And if it was a Democrat, they'd be a narcissist too. The issue is, how do we keep these leaders in relationship? And that responsibility falls upon the congregation, but it also requires the leader to be in a position of humility to say, yes, this is something that we can work out. That relationship of fellowship and humility, at least theologically training wise, starts in the Bible college or in the seminary where you experience a family type atmosphere. One last thing, you are absolutely correct. People who traumatize other people have been themselves traumatized. And that's one aspect of a narcissist. They have been wounded and they are seeking approval and they're seeking success for oftentimes many reasons. I think we've mentioned this on this podcast before, but there are CEOs of businesses that will hire someone to come in
And
and
berate them.
and break them and insult them
Yeah.
and say you'll never be as successful as your father,
Right.
or a competing CEO they'll say you'll never be as good as Joe's company over there.
Right.
And we need to be really honest,
Yeah.
and we need to know who is in the pastoral position. We need to know their life story, and they can't be completely honest. That's a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
But pastors are wounded people too, and wounded people will wound people, as the
Yeah.
as the saying is
Yeah.
similarly said.
Hurt people.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
hurting people hurt people too. So yeah,
true.
yeah.
I love how you brought up. Oh man, I'm going to switch from question asking here to like tying in a few of these things, which is like I love that you brought in the narcissism part of this, right? And for those who disagree with that rendition of it, that perspective on it, go look up narcissism. Go research. If you disagree, figure out what you're disagreeing with. Like understand what your terms are. We've defined our terms. So you might disagree with the way that the word means, but regardless, where I'm going with this is I love that you brought that up because we not just love narcissists, but one of the reasons why we would love narcissists, and we've talked about this off camera many times. You've written a blog post on it. I'm going to be writing a blog post on it. Is this idea that we love to outsource our faith, and ultimately, I think that is a really large reflection point for Christians, or should be right now, is how much am I outsourcing my faith? I mean, we all know how annoying it is when Google or Apple or whatever these companies are, they outsource their customer service to India, to China, to wherever, literally anywhere else but here. So now I don't just have the technical barrier of I can't get past this problem, but I also have a language barrier. So now this I'm outsourcing it because it's cheaper. It's helping my bottom line and all these things. So we hate it when we outsource our customer service teams, but then we so readily outsource our faith. And what I mean by that is that we will pay the pastor. Essentially, this is what churches come down to a large degree, not entirely, but to a large degree. We pay our pastor to be the professional to then tell us what to believe in. Because my life isn't so focused on theology, isn't so focused on my faith, isn't so focused on Jesus. It is only so focused on Jesus to the effect that I am A, giving enough, and two, I am bringing enough other people in to be a good Christian, right? I'm bringing other people into the fold. I am essentially the marketing team for my church, right? So outside of that being constantly on our minds as part of our faith, we outsource our own education on it. We outsource, learning about what the scripture really tells us, what Jesus is really saying by don't, throw your pearls among swine. And I think a really great way for people to take ownership of this aspect of their life is to go visit the Bema podcast, start at -1, listen
Mm-hmm.
through episode 2. You're going to catch on fire. You're going to continue on from there. But regardless, if we were to, we love to outsource our faith, and we love even more to outsource our faith to someone who wants to take control of the conversation, like a narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
So we got such a flourishing symbiotic relationship. We want to give it away, they want to take it away.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody's effed up when they screw up. And what's great is that now we haven't just outsourced our faith, but we've also been able to effectively scapegoat someone. Because I was just doing this because he told me that that was what it was. He told me how to live my faith, right? I was just doing as I was told. Well, a lot of, Germans, part of the Nazi military, also said those same words. I was just following what I was told. And it does come down to, hey, we do love a scapegoat. We do love a narcissist. A narcissist is the greatest person for both scapegoating and for outsourcing. It's crazy how those things get wrapped in to create quite the business model that is modern Christianity, or modern churchianity, rather, should I say.
It's interesting that in this conversation, in my mind, I've made so much of a connection between the issues that are in the church right now that we've mentioned, and also the form of education that we experience,
Mm.
both secular and seminary. Um, why do companies outsource their service agents to other countries? Why do they do that? Why?
Cheaper.
It's cheaper, exactly. So, outsourcing our faith is a cheaper way to be faithful. It's a
Mm-hmm.
cheap way to do our faith. And I think in the same way, like education, both secular and sacred, has become, how can we do this in the cheapest way possible? And unfortunately, as great it is to have, a relatively inexpensive degree, and programs, first began, you can get your master's degree in a year. That's awesome. And now they're lowering the prices even more. And I'm all for that. But the issue for me has always been, especially in secular secondary education, is like, am I really learning everything I need to know in a 9-month period here in this school environment?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I always rushed to get my assignments done, to read this document once and then talk about it instead of actually sitting there and digesting it? You have mentioned several times about your own bachelor's degree education, where you sit there and you're in conversation with people in great literature and all this sort of thing. So there's a small example of that. The seminary experience is not that different, where we are gathering together and we're discussing ideas, but even still, it's streamlined for efficiency and for economics to be the most efficient way to get through this whole process and get the degree at the end. And I think that's another aspect of this whole issue that I didn't expect to come up in the conversation. But here's the line that it relates specifically, is that when you are going through this very quick process, and you have someone who's a narcissist, you don't have an opportunity to get to know people really well. When you're with someone on a road trip, for example, that's when you learn how people really are.
Mm-hmm.
When you're on a road trip and you get to spend more time with someone, you get to see how they are in real life situations. When you live with someone, you get to have experiences where okay, maybe this person's in a bad mood today or something like that. You don't get that in the classroom experience. And the pastor's there, where the pastor has to always do what a narcissist does, and they present themselves nice and shiny on pulpit Sunday mornings, and anything that they share is very surface level. And it's maybe, 10 years ago, I was really mad once, and, the Lord rebuked me. And I said, okay, Lord, you're right. But, it's an environment where there's not enough time to spend with people and to actually get to know them, and so that things can come to light in a healthy atmosphere of equals. Last thing I'll say is this. Going back to this paradigm of, in our Christian faith, it has been this way for multiple centuries, where you have one person who's speaking to a passive crowd,
Mm.
and it's one-way communication. We need to stop doing that. We need to go back to what the earliest Christians did, where they sat around with each other over a meal,
Mm-hmm.
and they had table fellowship,
Mm-hmm.
and you have all the conversations that are happening over that situation. And I think that's one of the huge strengths of Icon Street Gospel, because that is the major thrust of our time together. And when we did the informal survey, November of 2024, that's what people said they wanted the most, is the time to just have fellowship and get to know other people.
Mm.
So that's a major emphasis of what we do. If we had that on a regular Sunday morning, if we had a situation where, guess what, there was no pulpit, but there was a buffet style, dinner where you're sitting around, you're going through the line, and you and I are on opposite sides. This is just an illustration. Okay, the food. You and I have been to a buffet before,
Mhm.
with hundreds of people.
Shady Maple, shout out.
Oh, Shady Maple. Oh, that's a whole nother podcast. That's where sin is allowed.
Gluttony is acceptable.
Heresy is a good word right there. So,
we are joking. If you didn't catch on,
I don't know. I might be. I don't know if I'm joking about that one. So, but yeah, like I have a vision of like what would happen if we did this at church, and I'm sure this happens in places. I've been told it does. You and I are on opposite side of the buffet table we're going through, and I say to you, "Hey, Stephen, what do you want on your plate?" And you tell me, and I put stuff on the plate that I'm holding, and you do the same thing for the plate you're holding. But at the end of it, we exchange, "Here's your plate that I filled for you." We're having conversation while we're doing that. We're laughing, we're joking, and you're like, "Hey, not so many potatoes."
We're learning about each other.
We're learning about each other.
Yep.
So that is not experienced in a healthy church. Although I come from the Southern Baptist tradition, which I'm very thankful for, and I miss the buffet tables that we would have on occasion. But then instead of pews that all are facing the same direction, what if we have tables where we're having a meal conversation with each other? Yeah. And yes, there can be someone who is kind of like organizing it and leading it and guiding. Hey, maybe here's a guiding question for each table to ask among themselves. This is what's going on. And then maybe there's someone who is leading, the Eucharist, having communion. And hey, everyone has a glass of wine, or Dr. Welch's, holy non-alcoholic grapefruit juice. That's that's right. Peace be with you. Maybe that's there, and that's your faith expression. I kid, but not really. And like we miss this fellowship together over meal as Christians, as a faith community, as the norm.
Yeah, right.
We know how to do it on occasion. We know how to do it for homecoming for sure. We know how to do it on special days. But what if it were actually the norm? What if we had this cumulative effect of spending time together in conversation?
Yeah.
Maybe that's a missing guardrail that needs to come in place to check our leaders.
Well, yeah, and I'm gonna push back on that. Like that should become the norm. I think it is the norm to an extent in churches today. But what the problem is that they see that we see it as the side dish. The main dish is church on Sunday, where we're listening to the guy. The side dish is what some term group or youth group or young adults group or whatever, Wednesday night group. It is these things that we go to that quite often do revolve around a meal. And quite often you do participate a lot more actively. And there isn't necessarily just the one person talking. There is questions asked. There is testimony exchanges. There's so much more vitality. And like you're saying, this family situation that is coming up. But it's the side dish to the main thing. It's the side dish to the main course, which is pastor, whatever his name is, whatever her name is. And we take that for granted when that was actually, like you're saying, like how the early church did things, and what's really natural and healthy to partake in.
We started talking a lot about dysfunction in the church and fallen leaders and this sort of thing. I don't think there's a lot of questions we didn't answer.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about how to restore these people or if they should be restored.
Yeah. Right. Well, and from my perspective as a Trinitarian Universalist, I have my own perspective on how to answer these questions. However, I understand that people do not believe as I do. These organizations do not believe as I do. So me casting my opinion is very much throwing pearls among swine. It is, this is totally a ripoff of Marty Solomon's teaching on this topic. I'm sure he got it from someone else, from his teachers, his mentors. That scripture of do not throw your pearls among swine was understood as, well, a pearl was what you would refer to for a verse, a scripture, right? A scripture verse. And when you brought scripture next to scripture, you're lining these pearls up like a pearl necklace, a beautiful pearl necklace. And swine or dog was something, and he makes it clear that it wasn't necessarily sure. I don't know if he's not clear on this or if it's just not clear that it wasn't necessarily a derogatory term, but it was a term used for people who were not Jews, right, of that time. And so it was simply just a term that was referred to for those who are not, following as we follow. So this idea of don't throw your pearls or your scripture among those who did not commit to what you committed to. They didn't take, the circumcision promise. They didn't get into this. They didn't, so don't start cramming basically your religious ideas, your belief system down other people's throats, telling them that they're not doing it right. And there's so many different ways of translating that today when you don't have that basis of what those two kind of words mean, pearl and swine.
Mhm.
And so all that to say is like, I'm sure you actually do have your perspectives on how to rightly handle those situations. So do I. Maybe they align, maybe they don't. But ultimately, it's not for us to decide because really we know that, hey, for one, these are organizations that don't believe as we do. These are people that don't believe as we do. And so to try and fit them into our principles, into our perspective of what real healing looks like, real natural family dedication and rejuvenation looks like, it's just not going to be healthy for us to try and put that on somebody else. So I am okay, and I hope that the audience is okay with not having an answer, you know, come from at least this podcast, that there's no straightforward answer, especially for all of them across the line, but also, hey, when you consider the different belief or eschatological narratives of what people believe in, how you should treat such individuals, such leaders, is going to change. And so it's okay to have some of that mystery, that mysticism, and not answer all those questions.
um,
Any other thoughts?
let me give you this illustration. Let's just say I just ate the best beef brisket meal that I've ever had. Sauce was awesome, comes with toppings and fixings, and it was had the right seasoning. I'm totally full and satisfied.
You talking about Shady Maple again?
They do have really good pot roast. World famous. Very tender, actually.
Let's get back to the analogy.
Yeah. If I'm
It's
full
so
and if I'm
funny.
satisfied, you can offer me whatever you want to try and offer me, but I'm not going to take it because I'm full. I'm satisfied. People who they have a sense of safety. Notice I use the word safety. They can't be controlled.
Mm.
Okay. The problem that is another aspect to what we're talking about is this issue of control. People who need a sense of certainty can be easily controlled. But if you feel safe, you can't be controlled. I think that's what's going on. And that's another aspect of what I said earlier, where the congregation is immature. And it's not their fault necessarily. It is an aspect of being in Western culture where we need certainty. We need to believe the right things. We need to sign. In some churches, you have to sign the bottom line literally to be a member. You have to be certain. You have to believe the right things, because if you don't, your eschatology tells you that you're going to be in for one hell of a ride. Okay. So the control factor that narcissists use fits perfectly for the need for certainty. However, what you were hinting at a minute ago is, instead of certainty, when a congregation has a sense of safety,
Mm-hmm.
that's when we can actually deal with conflicting ideas.
Right.
I don't need you to agree with me, because my sense of safety is not dependent upon that. I'm not looking to you, for safety. As Todd White would say, I'm not looking to you for acceptance, so you can't reject me.
Mm.
Let me put it in terms of safety. I'm not depending upon you for a sense of safety, so I don't need you to control me.
Right.
What if we as pastors, as shepherds, those who lead people to rest, agopao, we lead people to rest, we shepherd them to rest. What if that rest is actually maturity, and we put ourselves out of business as pastors, and we just walk with the flock that we're in,
Right.
and we have a mature flock that is fully safe, and then they can deal as a community with ideas that come up that, hey, we don't agree with that, but you're still welcome and accepted here. You know,
Yeah.
I don't believe in eternal conscious torture, but I will fellowship with you until the cows come home, and then we can slaughter them, and have really awesome roast beef and pot roast and brisket.
Okay.